Welcome to the Junior Jobs Podcast, where we give new software engineers actionable job search advice relevant to today's job market. In today's developer interview, I'm talking with Nico Martinucci, who got his first job in tech without bulk applying. So listen in to hear how he did it. All right, Nico, so you got that first job without bulk applying.
That's right.
How did you do it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think in total, I ended up only applying to maybe about 25 jobs over the course of my job search. That was a very intentional decision. Coming out of boot camp, especially, I finished up in March of this year, which I think by many metrics was one of the worst times to be entering the tech job market. And I think I was mentally preparing that this could be a slog. This could be maybe 3 months in best case, 9 months to a year or more in worst case. And as I was thinking about how I wanted to spend my time and what I wanted to, trying to create value out of the work I was putting into the job search, I really didn't want to be sitting at a computer for 8+ hours a day, mashing apply buttons on LinkedIn or other sites. There's no sort of progress that I was seeing in that. It's sort of, you either get something or you don't. You don't rarely get feedback. Most of the jobs even I applied to, I never heard back. And our boot camp, I went through the Rhythm boot camp, really stressed networking, and I think it's a terrifying approach for a lot of people. It was terrifying to me as well. But going into the search, that seemed like an incremental value add. Being able to reach out to people, to talk to people, to make connections. Hopefully make connections that could yield more connections in the future. And yeah, that was ultimately what got me in touch with the company where I'm now working.
Yeah, so let's unpack that a bit. Thanks for the background and context. So you mentioned networking specifically. Were these all strangers and net new relationships that you were creating, or these established relationships that you were just able to leverage to your success?
Yeah, more the latter. So I've heard and I totally sympathize, and I feel the same way about cold outreach to strangers. I tried that. I went through the motions. I sent my LinkedIn in mails to people that I thought might be good folks to talk to. I didn't hear back from any of them. What ended up being really successful for me was taking advantage of my existing network. Not dissimilar from other bootcamp grads. I had a career before this. I worked in transportation in the public sector, and no crazy huge network to speak of, but you work in a career for almost a decade, and you meet people and you connect with them. And luckily for me, I wanted to get back into the trans space, albeit now on the tech side. And I got to a point where I was looked at who I was connected with and said, a lot of these people might know folks who I should talk to. And I felt much better about going into the networking process, having those people available to me and to hopefully make introductions, so to vouch for my credibility. I'm a human being. I'm a good person to talk to, and to get an introduction to someone who might be able to help out. And that's really where I found my success. I started out with people in my network, in some cases, folks who were already working in the transportation technology space. In other cases who weren't, but they have networks as well, and for the most part like me, and are willing to use their networks to my advantage as well. And I was really able to just kind of spiral those forward into more and more conversations with interesting people.
Yeah, so these initial outreach, I want to focus on kind of like step zero
Sure.
of beginning
Yeah.
this process, right? So you reached out via LinkedIn, email, phone calls. How are you reaching out to these old connections of yours?
All of the above. Really
Okay.
depended on who and what kind of contact information I had for them. A lot of it was LinkedIn initially, which would move to emails or phone calls, and just sort of letting them take the lead on what they felt most comfortable with. As far as the kind of content of that, when I graduated boot camp, I posted on LinkedIn that, like, hey, I'm entering the job search. So there was a little bit of heads up there, and folks saw that. But and a lot of these were former colleagues who knew that I had, why I had left my last job and what I was doing next. So there was not a ton of surprise that now I'm like, hey, I finished and I'm looking for work. That kind of comes with the territory. And so those messages were, pretty straightforward. It was like, hey, I finished up the thing and now I'm entering the job search. And in some cases it was, I know you've been in this field, in transportation generally, for a long time, and I would love to pick your brain about if there's interesting companies that you think I should be keeping an eye out for, if there are people that you know of who, are working more directly in the technology space who might be interesting for me to talk to.
If you need help finding your first job in tech, make sure to check out David Roberts' video series called Standing Out in Tech, which covers every aspect of the junior developer job search and includes checklists for your resume and LinkedIn to make sure you stand out from the pack. He's a former recruiter and software engineer himself, so you know you can trust his stuff. And to sweeten the deal, if you enter the code JuniorJobs30 at checkout, one word, you'll get 30% off. So to summarize a little bit
Yeah.
here, you're saying these weren't always software engineers. These are just people in the space working in tangential roles, and you're just asking, hey, who do you know that I should know?
Correct. And in fact, I think of all of my networking conversations, I think only one was with an engineer, and the rest were with non-engineers who worked at companies that were of interest in sort of in this space. And that, there's sort of a supply and demand thing there. I think that was a factor of who I was connected with and the world I came from, and these were primarily the maybe more the government relations people that worked at some of these companies, or even product or sales folks. On the other hand, I found, these are roles that are typically a little bit more comfortable with networking and with picking up the phone when someone they don't know might be calling or interested in setting up some time. And I found a ton of receptiveness to chat with me. I think being in that role plus getting an introduction from a mutual connection was a really successful way. And I think there's obviously value in connecting with engineers for the sake of connecting with engineers. If your ultimate goal is a referral, which is sort of the path that I was taking, that can come from anybody at the company. And if you can make a meaningful connection, especially someone who might be more connected to the mission of the company and what those values might be reflected, and being able to kind of speak to those in my past experience, that was very successful, and really being able to make that connection was very effective.
Yeah, especially if you get somebody that is maybe in a leadership role, maybe
Correct.
Manager or above in the transportation space. They may have some more executive level connections, and then those executives might be more willing to talk to you if you come from
Right.
or referred for that conversation from somebody that they trust as well. So let's unwind a little bit the role that you have right now.
Sure.
And take me back, if you can, all the way to the very beginning of who was the first person you talked to, who they referred you to the next person, who referred you to the next.
Yeah.
Kind of how did that whole flow work for the job that you're in right now?
Yeah. So I work at a company called Populous. We build software for cities to help manage and visualize various transportation data streams, primarily from external sources. So
Oh, so like
Go
Sim
ahead.
City is your day-to-day job, right?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you just sort of pull out the transportation part of SimCity, then yep, that's exactly
That's you.
what I get
Oh,
to do.
so fun.
It's pretty great. And it's what I set out to find. It was something in the space that was, this is the kind of product that in my old role I, might have been involved with in some way on the other side, on the purchasing side. So let's see, it began with about a month before I actually graduated boot camp. We were starting to get into the outcomes process, and I was firing up, blowing the dust off my LinkedIn for the first time in quite some time. And luck would have it, the algorithm was friendly that day, and I saw a job posting got served up to me at Popular for a software engineer role. I'd not heard of this company. I did a little bit of looking into it, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. I should keep my eye on that. And the very next day, one of my very good friends posted on LinkedIn that he had just been hired there. So I reached out to him immediately and said, hey, I saw this role was posted and I'd love to chat about it. And he he was very kind. He said, I just started. I don't know much and not really in a position to sort of speak about it. But a friend of his, who actually I also knew, an acquaintance of mine, has been working there for a few years. And so he
What
was,
let me pause here real quick.
sure,
This connection that you're talking to was hired as a junior software engineer or in another role at that
in another
company?
role. This is in a sales role. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
Continue.
Yeah. Yeah. And so he put me in touch with our mutual friend, who had, like I said, had been there for a few years, also not an engineer. And I chatted with him, and we had a good talk about sort of what the company's doing and the direction. And that turned into a very informal phone call with the hiring manager. And I was, a month out of finishing boot camp. I'm still nervous about like getting my DSA stuff right. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, am I gonna have to like apply to a job right now? This is crazy. And luckily I talked to the hiring manager, and he said, don't sweat it. We have a few roles open. We're prioritizing these other ones. If you're done in a month, that's like perfect timing to have a conversation after the fact about whether you'd be a good fit. So that's great. But made that first connection, was able to kind of have something immediate that I could focus on coming out of boot camp. And it was one of the first or second jobs that I applied to was sort of sending my resume off to this hiring manager. And that we talked on the phone again and sort of did a bit of a gut check on sort of what timing would look like and what the process would look like. And I got a first round interview out of that, which was virtual, sort of a leak code style pseudo pair programming interview. And then a couple weeks after that, a full on-site, running me through the gauntlet of various interviews. And then got an offer about a week and a half after that.
And the rest is history.
And the rest is history.
It's a great story. So let me summarize here to make sure I'm understanding the sequence of events correctly.
Yeah.
You saw an opening for a software engineering role. You did not apply to it, but
Correct.
they at least kind of logged that in your head as an option for later.
Yep.
You then saw a friend that you had previously worked with, or you had an established relationship with.
Correct.
You reached out to them to talk about it. They're not in the software engineering space.
Correct.
That existing friendship referred you to another connection, who then referred you to a hiring manager. So now we're multiple levels deep in this networking thread here. And then you were able to get on their radar for a month out. So then when an opening was available, did you reach out to that hiring manager, or did you apply on their website, or how did you kind of reopen interest after a month?
Sure. Yeah. I didn't never formally apply for this position. This was by the time I'd gotten to this point, which I think, it was essentially a referral. But I was a known entity now to two people that worked at the company and had made contact with the hiring manager. It was as simple as emailing him my resume. And I think that's one of the major values. I think it's more of a small company thing to be honest, but one of the major values of the going this route is kind of feeling like you get to bypass a lot of that process. And it feels a little bit more personal in that I've not only made a direct connection for future benefit, but I've made a direct connection for the benefit of this process right now. People are already invested in you by the time that you sort of hit send on an email that says, hey, I'm reaching back out. Here's my resume. And that's that.
And you are almost guaranteed that your application, your resume is going to get read.
Definitely.
Whereas if it was through the influx of other junior developer applicants for an opening that was posted, hundreds, sometimes thousands of other candidates can be in that pool.
That's right.
You're going to get skimmed. You're going to get rejected because you probably don't have a lot of experience. You're just starting out. But if you have multiple people now vouching for you,
that's right,
and a direct email to that hiring manager, yes, absolutely, you skip all of that.
Yeah.
So this is one successful thread that led to an opportunity. So you did this multiple times, though. Were you able to advance further in the interview process with any of these other threads, or is this an anomaly that you were able to get as far as you did?
Yeah, this one was by far the furthest.
Well, I mean, you got a job, I guess.
I got a job. Yeah. I didn't. There weren't any other threads that made it past sort of those initial more screening calls for me. I had a few irons in the fire, so to speak, that I think might have gotten there had I not accepted this job. But I was so stoked to have gotten a job offer in that amount of time. I said, let's just do it.
Yeah, in a field that was relevant
Yeah.
to the previous work experience that you already had. I mean,
Every one of them. Yeah. And so this was all being able to kind of, so backing up for a second, that sort of talking to one friend, introduced to acquaintance, introduction to hiring manager, that happened multiple times. Being able to find somebody already in my network puts me in touch with another person. That person becomes a bit of a champion for me and says, yeah, I got 4 or 5 people that I think you should talk to. That snowballs into many more meetings. One of those companies happens to be hiring, so I can actually get on the phone. And in one case with the CEO of the company, again, small company, so that's a little bit easier to do. And then they express an interest, and then have a meeting with their CTO to see if there's more of a technical fit. And that one was like 4 or 5 people removed by that point.
yeah,
All people now that are part of my network. And that,
yeah.
when it comes to a job in the future, or needing to sort of pay it forward for folks who might reach out to me, these are all ways that I can take advantage of that and help make more connections.
Yeah, you never know in the future if something else comes from it, if you want to switch companies or whatever. But they all are advocates for you. They all know your skill set, and now you just have all these extra influential people in your network because you're able to parlay that existing relationship forward.
Yeah.
Another question here. So this happened multiple times. That's amazing, right? The average new software engineer, if you are coming from a professional background, already has hundreds of existing connections. How do you prioritize, though, which ones to begin with? Because if you just message all of your connections, probably most of them aren't going to lead as
Right.
far as yours did. So how did you know where to start or who
Yeah,
to
great
start with?
question. Great question. I sort of took an approach from both ends, and I can explain what I mean by that. I think starting out, it was really trying to identify people in my network who could fill kind of more of that champion role. So these were people that I already knew, were in prominent positions, or who had been in the industry for a while, or whose work had already taken them adjacent to some of these companies that I might be interested in. And in one case, a former boss who now is he's executive director of a nonprofit that's essentially helping to corral data standards that all of these companies are using to build their products. And so he's in direct contact with, I don't know, 30 or 40 of these companies. And so it's that kind of person that was like maybe my first phone call to say, hey, I'm doing this, and this is the space I want to get into, and can you help me make connections? And he was more than happy to do that. And that turned itself into maybe 8 or 9 conversations.
It sounds like the first step, though, there is then identifying what your target industry would be.
Correct.
Because
Correct.
you can talk to anybody manager level or above, a former boss or whatever, but they're not going to be as effective if you didn't have all of that lengthy work history that's relevant to the field you're applying to.
Right. And I was fortunate enough to, I was leaving my last job not with any ill will towards the industry itself, and it was something I wanted to keep doing. I definitely talked to some of my cohort mates when I went through the boot camp. We're definitely like, I need to get as far away from what I was doing before as possible. And I get it. I totally get it. And that's part of the value of a career change. I would say, it's and if that's like a stalwart, will not compromise approach, that's fine. But if there's even a little part of you that's like, yeah, I can probably work in an adjacent company to what I was doing before, if it meant I got to be a software engineer, then you've just opened yourself up to a ton of more resources available at your disposal when it comes to actually entering into the job market and the hiring process. So just putting that out there, yes, of course, requires a little bit of focus in terms of industry, but I think the benefit is what you have available to you as you approach that.
Yeah, the benefit of software engineering is that, in industry A versus industry B versus industry C, software engineering,
It's the
code
same.
is code. It's
Code
the
is code.
exact
Yep.
same. But for that first role, though, where you have no experience that you can pull from, leveraging that previous experience, I think is going to be crucial if
And
you can pull it
and
off.
it turns your previous experience from, just I've worked before, right? It's like, which is great, which is important. That's I think something that a boot camp grad might have over, say, somebody coming out of a computer science 4-year computer science degree program. it turns it from just that sort of categorical, I know how to have a job, to and I know this space, and I know the industry, and I know how these things work, and I'm familiar with these concepts and these different, players and all that stuff. And that kind of helps that chunk of your resume that's like the non-tech part of your resume start to become very relevant to what you're applying for.
Yeah, I mean, I started my career in consulting and I did maybe 12, 14 different projects in, a 10-year time span. And I felt like half the battle was just getting up to speed on the acronym,
Yep.
like the
Oh,
workflows.
totally. The acronyms is probably the
Yeah,
most important part.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, what do you want me to do?
Yeah. So
Absolutely.
coming back, that first approach was like, yeah, identifying some of those champions in my own network and using those as jumping off points. The other side of it was, finding, I was still looking for job openings as well, and in this space. And when I found one of those, that was my work backward approach. And I could take that job, take the company that job is at, look at who works at that company, and find somebody that I have a mutual connection with. LinkedIn does this great thing where if you search for people that work at a company, the default sort, at least when I was looking, these things change, but the default sort should be the people at the top are the folks that you have like the strongest mutual connections with. And at that point, it's just a matter of going through those and saying, is one of these mutual connections one of these champions that I've identified? Do I have mutual connection that's a very close personal friend who I know will speak very highly of me? Or is there a sort of a plurality? Maybe there's enough mutual connections that you can bypass that and you can say, I have 150 mutual connections with these people. Clearly, we've been in the same circles. Maybe this is the cold outreach opportunity. Maybe this is what my in-mail's for, is to say, hey, we know a lot of the same people, and I'm would love to hear about your work. Let's connect. And that's a way to kind of have those two ends of the spectrum meet, and to get to a point where you're just moving back and forth between your own network and where these jobs are, and all the while using these opportunities to continue to meet new people, to continue to make connections, which is sort of will pay dividends as kind of the longer it takes.
And how long did it take for you? You said a month before your boot camp, you started dusting off your LinkedIn. How
Yep.
long until you got the first job?
2 months.
2 months. So not even that long of a time. We usually talk
No.
about networking can take, a while to build up, but you're able to execute it on it pretty quick.
You really sort of, I think you kind of short circuit those early, very difficult parts of a traditional networking process, by taking advantage of the people that you already know. And I think there's and I fell into this camp. I think networking for me was synonymous with meeting strangers and trying to have manufactured conversations with strangers. And I think coming out and wanting to sort of hide in the safety of my existing network, I thought, oh, this feels better. I'll network later. I'll focus on who I know right now. And then as soon as I started to get in those conversations, like, oh, this is networking. I'm doing it.
Yeah,
Like,
you're
this is
doing
this
it.
is this is already happening. So I think it's about context, right? It doesn't feel like networking because I already know the person, or whatever. But at the same point, it's a different context. I'm going to that conversation, now with a new skill set and a new focus in my career, and I'm asking something of them, right? And that's probably the most important part of those conversations is an ask. And that's what to me kind of makes it networking, even if it's just, I'd love to stay in touch. And it could be as much as, I'd love a referral because your company is hiring and I think I'd be a great fit. And so once I realized that, I was like, hey, I'm doing it. I can keep doing this. This is going to be cool.
Yeah, it's a great for the, the introverts among us who maybe just want to stay with their existing relationships.
Yep.
Well, before we wrap up, I do want to give you an opportunity to get any shout outs to any organizations, people,
Sure.
networking events, et cetera, that kind of helped launch this career. What would you say were kind of the big players in making this whole transition successful for you?
Yeah, I think the one shout out I have is really for the boot camp I went through. I went through, like I said, the Rhythm full stack software engineer boot camp. It was a fantastic experience. It was one of the things that I really appreciated was the dedicated time at the end of the cohort to talk about the job search. And I learned a ton through that. A lot of the work that we did to sort of, more than just get the dust off our LinkedIn, but really polish and gild it, sort of was very helpful, and I think paid dividends. And just the whole process. I think networking is sort of getting your getting someone's eyes on your application and on as you as a person is like, that's obviously a very difficult and important first step, but it really is just the first step. And I think, then you got to go in a room and you got to show that you have the skills and that you're going to be a good fit, a good team member and everything and all that. And I think particularly the technical piece, I don't think I would have been anywhere close to where I was had it not been for the everything that I learned through the program. So really grateful for that, and really grateful for that whole experience.
Well, thank you, Nico, for coming on today and sharing your experience. That is all the time that we have for today, so we will see you all next time.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Junior Jobs Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please remember to like and subscribe, as that helps us reach more developers in need. And don't forget to check the show notes for details on today's sponsor and other job search services that we provide.